Okay, everyone, I am so thrilled you were able to take the time out of your busy schedule to join us here today. Really so happy to present my colleague here, someone whose work I've long admired, Dr. Prusaczyk from Washington St. Louis University. Beth is a really well-known implementation scientist in our area and in our space. She co-directs, and Beth, correct me if I'm wrong here, she co-directs the implementation for Aging Science Researcher Group. IASR, am I getting that right? Or it's ICER.
Implementation. You got the acronym right. Implementation Science and Aging Research Group.
Yeah. So a really great group that she has founded and is moderating at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, where she's an instructor there at the Institute for Informatics and in General Medical Sciences. Her work really focuses on improving healthcare for older people with dementia living in rural areas. And she does that by understanding how to better implement existing research findings into practice and policy. Dr. Prusaczyk also will be editing a special issue of the Gerontologist that will be coming out next year on implementation science and aging research. Really excited to see that, as well as someone who is also interested in implementation science. Why I invited Beth to give this special presentation to CHI is I have heard and about Beth giving this presentation. I believe it was Academy Health, right, Beth? You gave a similar presentation. It was incredibly well received there. And I thought it'd be wonderful if Beth was able to take time again out of her busy schedule to join us here in the Center for Healthy Aging and Innovation and share some of her wisdom on a topic I think many of us, if we're not practicing on a day-to-day basis, would like to learn more about. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Prusaczyk. I believe a question and answer is available, Kelly, through, well, are we using chat or the Q&A function on Zoom here? We can use chat. I see chat here on my screen. So feel free to pose questions in chat throughout the talk. I'm certain Beth will be breaking to address some of your questions throughout the presentation. And otherwise, welcome. And I'll turn it over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. I am so thrilled to be here today and to talk to you all. As Joe said, I am an implementation scientist and an aging researcher, and I've given talks on this topic to many different audiences, but I think this is actually the first audience that is aging specific, and maybe not everybody on the call is interested in aging research, but that's my space. So I'm really, really excited to have this audience today. And I will make just one additional plug. Joe mentioned the special issue we have forthcoming in the Gerontologist, but today our special issue in Public Policy and Aging report is coming out on implementation science and how you can use that to advance aging policy. So we're really pushing these two fields to merge. So if folks do have an interest in implementation science and aging research, please reach out to me. I would love to meet you and connect. But that is not the topic for today. So I'm going to pull up, there we go, share my screen and pull up my actual presentation to share with you all, because we're going to be talking social media today. As Joe said, I welcome your questions in the chat. We'll have time at the end for questions as well. I'm admittedly bad at monitoring the chat while presenting, but Kelly is going to help me out. She's going to be sort of getting the questions out of the chat so that I can get to them pretty quickly. If there's a huge clarifying question or a burning comment you want to make, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me. I will not be offended. I would love for this to be a very active hour and a half and conversation with you all, because I suspect people have strong feelings about social media one way or another. So I always tend to get some pretty good Q&A and discussion with folks. So let's just kick this off. As Joe suggested, I'm going to be talking to you today about science communication, what I call how do we communicate beyond the academy, and specifically the role of social media for researchers. So I'm going to start with telling you a little bit about me, and I want to hear a little bit from you. And then I have found when giving this presentation that there are always some folks in the audience who are not sold on why they need to do anything more than their research. Like, why do I need to engage in science communication? So I always start this talk with a little bit of that, just to get you excited and motivated to engage in this. Then we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about Twitter, of course, have some Q&A. And if we have time, I have some additional slides. Would happy to talk about other forms of science communication, specifically writing for the media. I'm a former journalist, so that's an expertise that I bring. So if we have time and there's interest, I'm happy to dive into that, but we'll spend most of the time talking about social media today. So I always start with this idea of knowing your audience, and it's the first tip or trick that I want to share with you all. And this isn't a surprise, you probably know this, but anytime you are communicating with anybody, whether it's academics or someone else, it's important to know your audience so that you can tailor information to that audience. Additionally, you want to explain to people why they should listen to you on the topic that you're speaking on. I think we often take for granted that, especially if we're speaking with academics, that our credentials will speak for themselves and we don't really need to explain who we are and why we're giving the talk. But if you're speaking to a non-academic audience, especially now that we've got a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, you really do need to take some time to explain to people, your story and who you are and why you're the one that they should be listening to on the topic that you're speaking on. So I'm going to practice what I preach and tell you a little bit about who I am so you know why I'm here. The traditional academic intro. I'm faculty at WashU School of Medicine in St. Louis. My master's and PhD are in social work, and my research focuses on improving health and healthcare for older adults through implementation science. That is the elevator pitch we would give anybody in academics, but that doesn't tell you why you should listen to me about science communication or social media. That just tells you I'm a researcher, like many of you on the call probably are. So to tell you a little bit about that other side of me, I am a former journalist. I have my bachelor's in journalism. If you want to go really far back, I've been a reporter since high school, but I worked as a reporter after graduating with my undergrad. I was convinced that was it for me. I had no aspirations to do anything else. I was sort of, Facebook reminds me plenty of times where I would triumphantly write in as my status, done with school forever, no more classes. And then I went back and got a master's and a PhD, but journalism was my first love. And it is a skill that I wouldn't trade. And I have been on the other side as the reporter, interviewing the expert, trying to get the information I need for my story. So I definitely have that experience that I want to share with academics now so that they are a little less intimidated about putting their work out into the popular press. I practice that as well now as an academic. I love engaging with the media. I think my favorite thing to do is to write op-eds for sort of regional or local newspapers. I have found that to be the most rewarding in terms of making a difference. But I've been interviewed on local, NPR station, and then some national and international press. So I've done it. I wouldn't say I'm great at it. People say I do fine. I always get nervous. But if I can learn how to be interviewed on CNN as somebody who has terrible social anxiety, you can too. And so I just put that out there to show you that you don't have to be very skilled to be able to learn how to do this. Now I want to hear a little bit about you. And we have, I think, too many folks on the call to sort of go around and do introductions. Wouldn't even attempt to do that. But I would love for you to put into the chat your level of skill with Twitter and your level of comfort. And you don't have to answer these directly, but just tell me a little bit about, do you think you're an expert at Twitter? Do you not even have an account on Twitter? How long have you been on there? How often do you go on there in a given day or a given week? Just so I know a little bit from you all, who you are and what your interests are in Twitter specifically. And I've pulled up the chat so I can see. None. That's perfect. All right, I don't have a Twitter account. I feel comfortable using it, but don't use it as often as other social media applications. Interesting. I'm a lurker. We're going to talk about lurking. Not an expert, but log in every day. That's in the right direction, comfortable, but use Facebook much more, don't have an account. I'm on Twitter, but never post, just retweet. All these are things we're going to be talking about. This is great. When I give this talk, there's always wide variability in the audience. Some people are way more skilled with Twitter than I am. Plenty of people don't even know what it is, don't have an account, have never been on there, and somewhere in between. So I've tried to tailor the content to sort of more beginner level. So if there are folks here who are experts and get on there all the time and feel really savvy with it, please put your ideas into the chat and your lessons and your tips and tricks. Help your colleagues out. I have learned a lot when other people share their tips and tricks for using Twitter. But it sounds like we got a lot of folks who are more on the beginner side, and that's great because that is a lot of what I have tailored this to. So thanks for entering all that into the chat. That's helpful. The next thing I'd like you to put into the chat is, if you haven't used Twitter yet, what are some reasons why not? If you are on Twitter, what were some of your hesitations or concerns before you dove in? I hear a lot about these sorts of concerns from trainees. So if you have things that you're concerned about, or you were concerned about using Twitter, please put those into the chat too. It can be rather harsh. It sure can. Yes, I remind people Twitter is still social media. It is still public. And if you have a viral tweet, or if you've ever had a tweet go viral, you get some real interesting comments and people in your DMs. Not completely clear on all the functions of replying directly versus posting. Oh, perfect. We're going to get into that, Jane. Concerned it's more of a space for calling people out rather than having a productive conversation. Yes, it is a balance. I have noticed on that topic. Absolutely. I still get nervous tweeting anything because I have been instilled to be conscious of my social medias. Yes, as my professional career. So it's intimidating. Yes. And I hear that a lot from junior faculty. I'm junior faculty. I was a postdoc. I was a doc student. I've sort of been thinking about that a lot. And we can talk about that at the end too. Overwhelmed by the negativity. Yeah, it is social media. I've tried to stay off social media because I know students look at everything from talking to them. Yes. And we'll get into that, but you definitely have to be thinking of who might read this. It is public, and it is archived unless you go in and delete it, and then somebody might have taken a screenshot anyway. So you do have to think about what you put on there. But these are great. This is really setting up the talk I have nicely. So I'm glad that a lot of folks are having these concerns and are sharing them, and hopefully you can get a little bit of these addressed during the talk and the Q&A. So thanks again for engaging in that with me. It's good to know who my audience is. Lesson number 1. So now let's move into science communication more broadly. As I mentioned, I like to start not just at social media and Twitter, because I am a really big fan of science communication broadly and think it's really important. So I like to start here. And you might have the first question be, what is science communication? If you're just really new to the whole concept. So we're going to start there. I really like, it's not necessarily a definition, but the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine have listed 5 goals of science communication, or SciComm. And I think the goals are the definition in my mind of what science communication is. They to me are the same. And those goals are: 1, to share recent findings and build excitement for science; to increase public appreciation for science; to increase knowledge and understanding of science; to influence the opinions, policy preferences, or behaviors of people. And people broadly, not just influential people, not just policymakers, but the general public. I really think it's important to focus on all levels in science communication. And then ensure that a diversity of perspectives about science are considered when societal problems are pursued. I really like these 5 goals. They, to me, hit on everything that is science communication and the reasons sort of why we want to do science communication. And certainly the pandemic has shown us that the science communication is needed. It might be hard. It might be particularly hard right now. Scientists have a particular, we're looked at differently now than we were pre-pandemic in the public eye, but I look at that as just more of a reason why we need to continue to engage, and we need to be out there because a really excellent academic researcher who is he is a liberal doctor in New York City, but he goes on Fox News all the time, and he gets asked all the time, why do you do that? You just end up getting hounded, and people are arguing with you. And he said, well, if I don't do it, someone else will, and I know what I'm talking about. So I want to fill that space before somebody who maybe doesn't know what they're talking about gets in there. And I think about that a lot now with the pandemic, that yes, it might be harder now. It might be a little more exhausting, but if you don't do it, you don't know who's going to step into that space and do it for you. So if you know something and you have the expertise, get in there and speak up. So what are some types of science communication? If those are the goals of it, it's not just Twitter. That's a big one, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But you can also write a blog post, create a website, give a talk at a local organization. You don't have to do anything technologically savvy to do science communication. You can just go and give a good old-fashioned talk. You can make a YouTube video, and I've seen folks do all of these. I have yet to make a YouTube video, but one of my colleagues does a really great thing where if she has a new paper that she's published, she will create a 1-minute YouTube video, just giving the 1-minute summary of that paper and the take home. What did she find? And it's in very plain language, and she posts it to her YouTube channel. That way, somebody who doesn't have access to journals that are behind paywalls, or maybe they don't even know where to find those, or they don't have an interest in that, they can just find out from her directly in 1 minute, what's the study and what did they find, and it's all there, and she can just share them however she needs to. So I really like that idea. I haven't done that yet, but it's something I aspire to do one day. Giving talks to local organizations is a really great way to build trust in science, going back to those 5 goals. You don't have to be reaching a wide audience to be doing science communication. I've given talks to local organizations that are just wanting to hear from somebody who has some expertise in vaccine dissemination, for example, or they just want to hear from a scientist. There's a lot of organizations now that are wanting scientists to speak to school kids or other underrepresented in science groups. And so you can certainly get out there, and if you're more of a person-to-person, remove the screen in between type of communicator, that is definitely science communication, is to get out and be engaged in your local community. Creating a website, writing a blog post, these are all things as well. So as I said at the beginning, I like to try and convince you to do science communication. If you are one of those who is maybe a little more hesitant, I think when I started doing this presentation for the first time back in, I think, 2018, I assumed people would only join the presentation if they were sold on this. And I got a lot of pushback from people who were interested but not sold. And so I added this in because I do think it helps to remind you why you might want to do this. And I flip it around and go through the reasons why we don't do it, and then explain to you why maybe those are not good reasons to avoid science communication. So the first reason, I think the biggest reason I hear is as a researcher, as an academic, we don't think it's our job. We are the scientists, we're the researchers, we are here to do the science and the research, and it's not our job to communicate it beyond publishing it in a journal. That's why universities have marketing and public relations departments, and it's just, we don't think it's our job. If you find yourself saying that, I would ask you to ask yourself, why do you do this science? Why do you do the research that you do? What impact do you want your science to have? I think most people, when they ask themselves that, the answer is not, boy, I really got into this because I wanted to publish in Science or Nature or JAMA. You got into it because you wanted to improve people's lives, improve health, improve healthcare, improve poverty, whatever the case may be. There's something out there in the world that you wanted to improve. And if that's your job, if that's why you got into this, science communication is a part of that. We know that publishing in journals doesn't reach anybody except other academics. And we know that's not going to change the real world. If we're just reading, if it's just reaching academics, they're not going to be the ones to implement things in the real world or create policies. based on the evidence. So if you want to improve the thing in the real world that you got into science for, science communication is a way to do that. So I almost look at it as an ethical and a moral obligation as a scientist to engage in science communication so that I'm ultimately making the impact that I want. We don't get rewarded for it. I hear this a lot. And that's true, sort of. I will not sugarcoat it. You know, promotion and tenure documents or criteria, they don't usually explicitly mention science communication, but it's changing. I have heard from a number of people who have directly told me, you know, my institution or my department is starting to incorporate some of this into their promotion and tenure requirements, or just, you know, there's a lot more interest if you're at a trainee or a staff level. You know, there's a lot of senior research groups or senior researchers who are looking for someone to sort of take over social media or science communication for their large center. And so it's a skill that can actually get you some rewards in the academic world, either that, you know, by getting you a new position or getting you a little bit closer to promotion. So it's changing, but I will admit it's not fully there yet. You know, you're not going to get your tweets ranked above your publications or your grants when you go up for promotion, but we are starting to appreciate this more. And I know at my institution, they are currently revamping a lot of their promotion and tenure requirements, and they're going to have some of this listed in there. Speaking of getting academic boosts through science communication, there's actually proof that engaging in science communication can boost your academic cred in the ways that it does count. So there was a wonderful study done looking at the sort of real world, or sort of not real world, the academic benefits of Twitter, being on Twitter. And so they found that Twitter use as an academic was associated with more professional speaking invitations, more research presentation invitations, collaborations on papers, grants, projects, media requests, getting invited to do the interviews, and more manuscript citations. So those are things that absolutely you can put on your resume or your CV that your boss will absolutely be happy to see. And those came from Twitter engagement. So if you don't want to do science communication because you don't think it's your moral or ethical duty, do it because it's going to boost the number of citations in your manuscripts, or you're going to get invited to collaborate on papers. And I've had, I think, all of these. I don't know about the manuscript citations, but I've definitely gotten requests for those first 4 bullet points based on my interactions and the networking that I have done on Twitter. So anecdotally, I've seen it, and the science, the references are at the end of the slide deck. The science shows that science communication is good. So the last reason is just, as academics, we're too type A. We aren't trained in science communication. We're uncomfortable being uncomfortable. I get it. I'm the same way. I have a little bit more comfort doing this because of my previous training, but I completely understand that we're not trained in this, and then we sort of expect, as scientists or researchers, we're expected to be flawless at our science communication. And so it is true, it's uncomfortable, but we can push through that and we can learn. It is not incredibly hard. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. So if you feel like it's too hard and too overwhelming to start, just keep pushing, keep trying to engage a little bit every day or every week, and you'll get to a place where you are much more comfortable. And then you can teach other people how to get comfortable as well. So those are the big reasons I hear we don't do science communication. We don't think it's our job. We don't get rewarded, and we don't know how to do it. And I just want to remind you that I think it's our job as scientists and researchers who want to change the world. We do get rewarded for it, and we can learn to do it and do it well. So please at least open your mind to the idea that you can become a science communicator, and you can be savvy on Twitter. You can be writing op-eds. You can be getting interviewed for radio and TV. It definitely can be you. All right, so let's move now into social media specifically as a science communication tool. As I mentioned on the previous slides, there's a lot of other things like giving talks to local orgs or putting out a website. We're just going to focus on social media for this talk. There's a lot of different types of social media, I'm sure everybody is aware, there's LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok. TikTok's been huge with the pandemic. A lot of doctors, like clinician doctors, have been on TikTok. I remember lots of hand washing videos when the pandemic started. I don't do TikTok. It's too much. I'm overwhelmed by TikTok, so I haven't tried it yet. I will get there maybe eventually. But just know there's a lot of opportunities in social media. I mostly focus on Twitter. That I think is probably the biggest social media outlet for academics and researchers, more than Facebook or LinkedIn. People call it academic Twitter because it is such a sort of known entity. So we're going to spend most of the time talking about Twitter, but there are other options if you really are averse to Twitter. So to start, I like to list a few general principles of effectively using Twitter, and these will apply to all the fine details that I talk about next. So just kind of when in doubt, if you're about to do something on Twitter, just keep these principles in mind, and I think you'll be fine. Maybe you get confused on what a retweet and a quote retweet is, and that's all fine as long as you're kind of coming back to these general principles. This, I guess, goes for any science communication. Always communicate clearly. Don't use technical language. Twitter is public. Yes, you may be interacting with other academics who understand that technical language, but just try and remember that there might be journalists reading the tweets, or policymakers, policy staffers more likely, or just the general public. And you want to be understandable to anybody who's listening. So try to avoid jargon and communicate clearly. This one's really important, to not hedge what you say too much, but also don't get out over your skis. And so this is a lesson I learned. I did a policy fellowship in DC and worked in the Senate for a year, and was talking to a couple of staff members from the Congressional Research Service, which is a part of the legislative branch. They call it essentially Congress's think tank. And it's a whole bunch of really smart PhDs who, when a congressperson needs science and evidence and research and they want to know about something, they go to the Congressional Research Service and say, hey, tell me about, childhood obesity interventions. Like, tell me how I can fix childhood obesity. And the Congressional Research Service will find all of the evidence, they will summarize it, they will put it into a report, and they will go and they will explain it all to the senator's staff. So I was talking to the Congressional Research Service as somebody who's interested in how we get science and research and evidence to policymakers. I was like, wow, you guys are the ones doing it. You're actually going and giving the science directly to the people who make policies, and you're trusted. You're not an outsider. What can we as scientists do to help you, the Congressional Research Service, give the science to the policymakers? And they said, we are by law required to be neutral. We can't make recommendations to the policymakers. We have to present both sides to every issue that they request information on. They said, but if you, as the researcher, make a claim in your paper, and you make a recommendation, well, we can certainly include that in our summary. So they asked for us to be a lot more clear and confident and make recommendations in our manuscripts, so that they could then pass those recommendations on to policymakers. And it sort of blew my mind, because if you've written an academic paper, one of the last paragraphs is a long paragraph about the limitations and everything that was not so great about your research. And then you end with a call for more research. And you don't usually make any sort of policy claims or, make any sort of suggestions of how people should change the way they practice. We're very careful in our academic papers, and that translates over into social media, of course, as well. But that's not helpful to people who are looking for guidance. And I think most of the time we can probably say more than we do. Maybe we don't want to say something that suggests causality. But for example, in my work with rural dementia services, I'm pretty confident I can say we need to invest more in rural infrastructure for aging social services. Like, I don't feel like that's going too far out on a limb to say we need to invest more in that. So there are some things you can usually say confidently and assertively, even if it's not a p-value to come out of your direct study. So don't hedge, be confident, but also, of course, don't say something that's well outside of your area of expertise. Don't get over your skis. Be confident, but not pompous. That's just also probably good science communication, even outside of social media. Nobody likes somebody who looks like they know it all. So always have, a fair bit of humility. And if you don't, social media will give you a helping pretty quickly as well. Bring your whole self to Twitter as privilege allows. I used to just have bring your whole self. And then a couple of my colleagues actually on Twitter, my colleagues of color, reminded me that it's a lot safer for me as a white woman to be able to bring my whole self than it is for them as Black women. And so I definitely put that in as privilege allows, as you feel comfortable sharing, bring your whole self. That is not just me saying that. That's also, I think I have in the next bullet point. That's what the science shows, that people who are showing their sort of whole self, their real lives, you don't have to post all of your intimate life details, but you don't want to just be presenting this very cold scientist persona. You want to show people, that you have a life, you have family, you have pets, you go on vacations, you have a history. So bring more than just your science self to Twitter. Bring your whole self. And this is to the comment somebody put in the chat about being a lurker. Don't be a lurker if you can avoid it. Be active on Twitter. That same wonderful study I was talking about that looked at sort of the benefits to using academic Twitter, they found that the most impactful Twitter users didn't just use it to promote their own work. So they weren't just going on there and lurking. They weren't just going on there and sharing like, hey, look what I did. Look at all the papers or look at the talks I'm giving. But they used it to engage in curating and contributing resources to a broader conversation in their field or area of interest. And that's really what I have seen with Twitter. Is it is a dialogue. It's a conversation you're having with your colleagues, with people outside of your area of expertise, other academics who are, well outside. Like I have some pretty random colleagues now in fields like soil science that I obviously don't do anything related to, but we have found a lot of overlap. And so you just want to be there and you want to be engaging in the conversation and sharing whatever expertise you have and asking questions. And often a lot of times it's the conversations on academic Twitter aren't necessarily about science. It's more about academia. It's about, hey, how do I navigate this challenge in academia? Or, hey, I'm a grad student and I'm looking for a postdoc, who has any ideas of where to look? So you get a lot of support as an academic on Twitter just by being on there and being sort of part of the community. But of course, don't be too active. I have a wonderful colleague. He was one of my professors in grad school, and he used to be on Twitter and Facebook way too much, and he would post all the time. And I was like, oh, Tim, I love you, but I gotta hide you because you're posting too much. So obviously you don't want to overrun people's timelines, and that's just good social media practice in general. But these are I think general principles for when you're getting onto Twitter. Communicate clearly, be confident, but don't say anything that's well beyond your area of expertise. Show a little bit of your personality and be part of the community, be part of the conversation. So now let's actually get into the nitty gritty of Twitter. And I have broken this down pretty basic. And so if folks are more skilled and they kind of want to just take this in and add in some stuff to the chat that they've learned, please do. But I really start with what I call the anatomy of a tweet. So I'm going to show you a tweet and we're going to explain what all of these things mean. So this is someone else's tweet. If you pull up Twitter, you're going to see everybody else's tweets. So what is it that you're looking at? So this is a tweet from the Gerontological Society of America. So I've got, and I'll share these slides afterwards if you need to pull this up next to your browser and kind of piece it together. But it's got all the different pieces to what a tweet is. It's shows you what the Twitter users handle and name are. Their picture, there's hashtags, there's a shortened hyperlink, because everything with Twitter is about the number of characters. So you want to shorten any hyperlink through a hyperlink shortening website like bit.ly, a picture or a GIF is in there. These things down here at the bottom of a tweet are important. This is how you engage on Twitter. You might want to comment on this tweet. Maybe you want to share it by retweeting it. And we'll talk about retweets in a minute. You just want to like it, kind of want to thumbs up, endorse it, or you want to share the link to the tweet. Like my husband's not on Twitter, so I'm often like taking screenshots of tweets to show him, or I'm sending him the link to the tweet so that he can then pull it up. So if you want to share it with somebody who's not on Twitter, or if you just want to bookmark it. But this is the anatomy of someone else's tweet. So if you pull up Twitter and you get overwhelmed, come back to this and sort of piece together what you're seeing. It's not that overwhelming once you know the building blocks of a tweet. So then what does a tweet look like that you write? What's the anatomy of that tweet? So this is a tweet, a draft that I started writing. So you can kind of see it's a lot of the same things. That's my profile picture. I'm tagging, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'm tagging other Twitter users. I'm using hashtags we'll talk about. These are all the different things you can do with your tweet before you post it. So you can change who can see the tweet. Most people, I think, keep it public. Anyone on Twitter can reply, but maybe you only want your followers to be able to reply. You could change the privacy settings. You can add pictures, GIFs, polls, emojis. You can schedule a tweet to come out later. You can go ahead and write it and schedule it to come out, Tuesday at 6 a.m. I do that a lot when I'm running the ISAR Twitter page at conferences. I will spend a couple hours a week before a conference scheduling a bunch of tweets to go out during the conference so that I'm not trying to do two things at once, enjoy the conference and tweet. So scheduling tweets is a great tool if you're overwhelmed and busy. This little circle here is just showing you how close you are to running out of characters. The closer it gets to being a complete blue circle, the closer you are to not having any more characters to write your tweet. You can start a thread, which we'll talk about. And then, the big blue tweet button is the send button. So these are, again, all the kind of building blocks to tweeting. We'll talk about the hashtags and the tagging a bit in a minute, but if you get overwhelmed, pull this back up and kind of play around with it. Click on all of these different options and see what it actually takes you to. So let's talk about quickly creating your handle or username, which is the also fundamental building block of Twitter. It is your username. It's unique to you. It's how people find you on Twitter. Your handle it's everything. It's not your email address. It shouldn't be something nondescript or private. It should be something that identifies you, but is also easy to remember and short. It's not case sensitive, and I'll show you why that matters on the next slide. But these are some good examples of Twitter handles. Dr. Jen Hall. That tells you that person behind the screen is Jen Hall, and she's a doctor. That's very kind of straightforward and simple and easy. Or it's just the name, Amy Adante. That's a great Twitter handle. Maybe you're running a Twitter account for a lab or a center or an organization. So you might have the name of that organization be the Twitter, or it'd be part of the Twitter handle, or maybe it's something like preventing CVD, cardiovascular disease. I don't actually remember who's behind this Twitter account, but it tells me that the tweets coming from that account are probably going to be related to heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and prevention. So it's a good Twitter handle to tell me exactly what that account is about. Now, not to call anybody out, but here are some not so good Twitter handles. This first one I will somewhat take responsibility for. So Implement Collab is the Society for Implementation Research Collaboration, or CIRC. And I didn't create this, but I was on the board when it was created. So I do have to bear some responsibility, but it's a terrible Twitter handle. It's like the two words cut off in weird ways. Implement Collab. It doesn't tell you what it is. It doesn't tell you who it is. Sarah Landis made it. She admits it's not the greatest, but it is what it is. That's our handle. But you don't want to have sort of just two weird cut off words. It doesn't tell anybody who's behind that. This one is a good example of why you need to think about case sensitive Twitter handles. So is it Samiam? Is it Samiam? It might look one way if you capitalize it the right way, but if it's not case sensitive, it's not going to be as clear. So just think about that. And then anything with a bunch of numbers at the end, obviously you don't want that's going to make people think you're a bot. And Twitter will suggest that to you if you let it. So don't just let Twitter suggest a handle to you. Spend some time thinking about what you want your handle to be. When in doubt, just go with your name, add your credentials. So I could have done Beth Prusaczyk. There wasn't one of those, not surprisingly, but it would most certainly be prone to spelling errors. And if somebody misspells your handle while they're trying to tag you, you won't see that tag. It won't get connected to you. So you don't want to have something that's going to be prone to spelling errors. Just Beth P was already taken though. I could have done Beth P PhD, but that double P I think would have been prone to errors. People would have either only thought it was one P, or they maybe accidentally only put one P. And again, if it's misspelled, it's not gonna show up for you. So I chose Beth P _DI for dissemination and implementation. I probably wouldn't choose it now. I chose it as a first-year doctoral student very quickly at a conference when I needed to get on Twitter immediately. But it is my name now, and I can't, it is what people know me as, so I kept it. Once you have your handle, where would you share it beyond Twitter? And this is, I think, a really important way to boost your following on Twitter to people who are out to people outside of Twitter. They may be on Twitter, but you're not engaging with them on Twitter. So certainly include it in your email signature. You've probably seen this in a lot of places. Most people do it nowadays. If you're giving presentations, put your Twitter handle on every slide at least. Or at least at the beginning or the end. So I have mine down here on every slide. Sometimes I don't put it on every slide if I can't fit it, or it's not necessarily that relevant if I don't think it's going to be a big tweeting audience. I'll put it at the beginning though, and I'll put it at the end, but always include it somewhere in your presentations. Many journals are now asking for one. If you've submitted to a journal recently, you might have seen that. I know the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, JAGS, asks for one, and you definitely want to have this. It's not usually required, but please, if you have a Twitter handle, put it in there, because the journals and sometimes the publishers will tweet out, or the professional society that's behind the journal, they will tweet out your new paper, and they have way more followers than you probably do. They have more followers than I do. So it's a really good opportunity to get some visibility and some promotion. So please have a Twitter handle ready for when journals ask. Once you're on Twitter and you've got your handle and you're ready to go, it really is the same as any other social media. You want to be able to have people follow you and you follow them. It's engaging with the community. Some good accounts to start with, to follow once you get on Twitter. Academic Chatter. I know the folks who are behind it. I actually gave a co-presentation on social media with them not that long ago, and it's fascinating. It's just sort of two people who believed in academic Twitter, so they started this account called Academic Chatter, and they will retweet almost anything that's related to academia on Twitter. Obviously, they don't retweet sort of crazy stuff, but if it's just something that they think other academics would be interested in seeing, they will retweet it, and they have hundreds of thousands of followers. So it's a great place to get your feet wet of academic Twitter. Research Whisper is a good one. Chronicle, PhD Voice if you're a PhD student, Postdoc Voice if you're a postdoc. These are sort of specialized accounts to really help bring together postdocs or PhD students and to talk about the challenges of those two different types of programs. So these are some good places to start. There's more, and you can certainly just do a Google search of academic Twitter accounts, and there's plenty of lists out there. These are some good ones to start with though. So let's talk hashtags. They're really important on Twitter. It's a way to index or catalog your tweet, and it really unleashes the power of Twitter in my mind. It's a way to tag your tweets content. So if I'm tweeting about implementation science, I will definitely include hashtag ImpSci, IMPSCI. That is the hashtag that's most associated with implementation science. And that way, if somebody's searching for tweets about implementation science, they can search the hashtag ImpSci and they'll find my tweet. You can tie it to an event. We'll talk about conferences in a minute, or you can use it to hashtag a topic. Like, let's say you're tweeting about gun violence, you would use hashtag gun violence, and that would catalog your tweet as part of sort of the gun violence tweet sphere. You can also follow hashtags to see more tweets than just those of the people you follow. So if I follow the hashtag ImpSci, I will see tweets that are tagged with ImpSci, And maybe they're from people I don't follow, people I don't even know. I'm like, oh, well, who's this person that's tweeting about implementation science? They must be interested in that, or they must know about it. I'm going to go ahead and follow them. So it's a great way to find people to follow, for people to find you and know what you tweet about and know what your interests are. So hashtags are really important. To find hashtags relevant in your area of research or clinical practice, the best thing to do is look and see what other people in your area are using and just copy those. Conference hashtags are really important. We'll talk about that next. Some universal hashtags to start: hashtag academic Twitter, hashtag academic chatter, women in academia, Black academics. These are great, again, universal academic research hashtags. If you just want to start filling out your timeline, when I first got on Twitter, I didn't follow that many people. And so it was like a pretty quiet feed for me. And it was always the same 3 people. But if you start following hashtags, you will get a much more rich, diverse feed when you pull up Twitter. And then that's how you start finding people to follow. You start finding things to jump in on and have conversations with. So following these universal hashtags is a really important start to Twitter. So conference hashtags, really important. Almost every conference has a hashtag now, even during the pandemic virtual conference world that we live in now. Here's some from some previous conferences. It's a great way to get exposure, engagement, and followers. It's how I started on Twitter. I was a doctoral student at conferences. I didn't know anybody. I wasn't really presenting, but boy, I was on Twitter and I was trying to let people know, like, hey, I'm here at the conference, associate my name with this field and with this conference, and get people to know who I was. So it's really great for trainees. Things you can do at conferences: tweet about your posters, your presentations, tell people where they can come see it, leave a cliffhanger like, oh, do you ever wonder how to implement health IT in rural areas? Come find out in ballroom A at 12 o'clock or whatever. You can go ahead and tell them the main takeaway, like, we found X, Y, and Z, come to our talk. You can do whatever you want. You're just out there trying to let people know where they can find you and what they can hear you talk about. You can find, or you can tweet about what other stuff you're finding interesting. If you are at a talk that's really great, tweet about it. If you're at a poster presentation, ask the presenter, hey, can I take a picture of your poster and tweet it? You can just share other stuff going on at the conference. And that's actually a really great way to, again, kind of let yourself be known in an area, is to just be active and engaged. Live tweeting a presentation or talk at a conference is great. And what live tweeting means is you just basically tweet as much of what's being said as fast as you can, kind of like a live transcript. And this is really helpful because certainly we've all been in a situation where you want to go to one talk, but there's another talk at the same time and you can't go. Well, if you're kind of following Twitter, you can see somebody live tweeting that talk, and it's almost as if you're getting a live transcript or you're watching it on mute with the subtitles. And as the person doing the live tweeting, that's getting you a lot of eyes. It's got a lot of people looking at your account and reading your tweets and engaging with your tweets. So live tweeting is a great thing if you can pull it off and you have the time. So there we go. Oh, I think I went too far. Sorry, my PowerPoint was lagging. So let's give you a couple of tweet templates to round things out so that when you get on Twitter, kind of exactly what you might want to tweet. So let's say you have a new publication that you want to tweet about, and maybe it's your publication, or maybe it's somebody else's publication that you just found really interesting. I think this first example, I have to move my pictures. Sorry, I can't see the very top. Yes. So the key pieces to tweeting about a new publication, whether it's yours or not, is you want to say what the paper is about. If you haven't read it, you can say, I'm looking forward to reading this. Or if you read it, tell people what you liked about it. Include a link to the paper. And again, if you need to make it shorter than the original hyperlink, just go to a link shortening website like Bitly, put it in there, get that shorter link. It'll save you characters. Tag the authors of the paper. And so that's when you would do the @ symbol and their handle if they're on Twitter. Tag their institutions, the centers they're affiliated with, the universities, the schools. Tag the journal if they have a Twitter account, and any professional societies relevant to the topic. If I'm tweeting about aging research, I'm going to tag the Gerontological Society of America. I'm going to tag the John A. Hartford Foundation. I'm going to tag the American Geriatric Society. They maybe don't have anything to do with that particular paper, but they are relevant stakeholders to my research. So I'm going to tag them, and sometimes they retweet, and it's great. Include relevant hashtags like hashtag ImpSci or HSR for health services research. If it's a paper, again, take a screenshot of the paper title that has the journal, the name, of the paper, the authors. Include that screenshot with your tweet. Tweets that have a picture or a GIF, they get kind of boosted in the algorithm. And so you want to, if you can, include something like that just to give more visibility to your tweet. So what would this look like? So this is an actual tweet that Oxford Publishing, tweeted out about a paper I published last spring. And it's a great example. I was not looking for one that was about me, but I was like, boy, this is pretty good, so I'm going to include it. So they tweeted out, this is the publisher, they tweeted out, a synopsis of my paper. They have the bit.ly hyperlink to my paper. They tagged me. They tagged the Infectious Disease Society of America, which is the professional society that runs the journal, Open Forum Infectious Disease. They included a hashtag. I don't know that that's like a common hashtag, but they did it. They included World Immunization Week. So they were tying my paper to a topic and a current event. They were using some other hashtags like vaccines work. And then this is a screenshot of, my paper, and it's got my name so that I'm clearly linked to it. It's got the name of the journal. It's got the date so people can go and find it. So this is a really great template. If you wanted to tweet about somebody's new paper, follow these building blocks and you can't go wrong. Now, if you want to tweet about your own paper, this is a real tweet. Again, I don't know Ian Lundberg, but I just thought it was a pretty clear tweet of how to tweet about a publication. So, just saying, I've got this new paper with, and you tag your co-authors, you make only one point, he's summarizing the paper in a one sentence, bite, and then he's got a link to the paper. So you could click on that, picture, and that would take you out to the paper. So it doesn't have to have all the fancy hashtags. I mean, those help, but if that's too overwhelming to start, just follow this, tag your co-authors and say, hey, here's my paper, here's what it's about. And you got 377 likes on that tweet. So again, tweet templates for conferences. The key pieces, you want to describe what is being said, why it's important, include a picture always if you can. It doesn't have to be a picture of the slides that the presenter is using or the poster. If it's just the speaker at the podium, if it's the keynote or something, that's fine. It's just good to include pictures if you can. Tag the authors, institutions, all that same stuff. Make sure to include the conference hashtag. If you're tweeting from a conference or about a conference, don't skip the conference hashtag. I know lots of folks, and I do it as well. If I can't attend a conference, I will follow that conference hashtag on Twitter during the conference. And it's almost like I'm there. And especially in the virtual world now, it doesn't feel too far removed from being at the actual virtual conference. So make sure you include that conference hashtag. It helps people identify you, and people will be looking for those tweets specifically. So it boosts your visibility. Here's a great example. This is from Academy Health's annual research meeting a couple of years ago. And so this is somebody who's watching Professor Heidi Allen's talk, and it's just a great example. They take a picture, they kind of give you the one sentence summary of what the presentation is talking about. They tag Professor Allen, and then they include the conference hashtag. So a great example. Here's another one from the Society of Behavioral Medicine. This is somebody, just saying, hey, we, hanging out with my colleagues, had a great time presenting. Here's our work, here's me and my poster. They tag all sorts of people, they use hashtags. So again, just go back to those building blocks of what you want the tweet to say. And it doesn't have to sort of be this really eloquent, poetic tweet. It can just be the building blocks all thrown in there together. It's all about just kind of getting that algorithm of Twitter to boost your tweet and to get more eyes on it. All right, really quickly, I want to address retweets and quote retweets, because I think this is a thing where people can get really confused, because you will see the retweet button, and when you actually click the retweet button, it's going to give you the option to either retweet or quote retweet. Retweet Simple retweet is just simply sharing someone else's tweet with your followers. You don't add anything to it, you just amplify it. If you're on Facebook, it's just like sharing. You're just sharing that tweet. But a quote retweet is sharing someone else's tweet and adding your own commentary on top of it. And I have a couple of pictures to show you. So a simple retweet. So this is I retweeted Matteo Cesari's tweet about geriatric medicine because I liked it. It's like, oh, that's lovely. I care about geriatric medicine. I'm gonna like it. So I clicked the heart button. That's why it's red, because I had clicked it. And then I just simply retweeted it. So you can see here, it just says you retweeted. I didn't add any commentary to it. I just shared it with my followers. A quote retweet though. So my friend and colleague, Carolyn Audette, got promoted to associate professor. She got tenure, was very excited. So I wanted to share that good news, but I wanted to add my own commentary. So I quote retweeted it. And so I was able to add up here at the top my own tweet, just saying, hey, congrats, Carolyn, well deserved. And then I shared her tweet. So a quote retweet is you get to add your own commentary. A simple retweet is just sharing it. So that's just a point of clarification, because it can be confusing if you're not prepared. You go to retweet something and then suddenly you have to choose between a retweet and a quote retweet. What is that? And Beth didn't tell me. Now you know what the difference is. And lastly, we will talk about threads for those who are maybe a little more advanced with Twitter and are ready to sort of say more on Twitter. So there is a way to create basically a thread of multiple tweets that you write and tie them all together so that somebody can read the whole thing. And it essentially gets you out of the 140, 280 character bind. And I use threads all the time because I'm wordy and I like to write a lot. So for example, let's say you're writing this tweet. This is the tweet I showed you earlier, and I'm out of space, or I want to say more. I'm not done. I would then click this little plus sign here, and it would open up another tweet. And you can see it's connected by a thread between my first tweet and my second tweet. And now I have another tweet that I can type and add to my thread. So let's say I wrote that, and maybe I want to add a third tweet for something else I want to say. I would just keep clicking, that plus sign, and just keep adding tweets all the way. You're just creating that thread of tweets. Whenever you're ready, you're done, you can just click tweet all, and the whole thread goes out. And it's still individual tweets, and people can still interact with each individual tweet. So they could like and comment on this, they could like and comment on this, but it's just a way to tie all those tweets together so that people can sort of read more of what you want to say. You're not kind of confined to that one tweet with 280 characters. So I use threads a lot. People love threads. It's really, again, just a way to be more expressive, and I have a hard time getting down to 280 characters. So I will use threads all the time, and it's perfectly acceptable. I want to see what the time is, make sure we have time. Yes, we're just about at time for questions. So I will not jump out to Twitter, but I have this link in the slides. I was giving this presentation last year at some point for a group of postdocs and doctoral students, and I asked academic Twitter to tell me how they have seen Twitter improve or help or benefit their careers, both in traditional and non-traditional ways. And I got such great feedback from people I didn't know, because I tagged hashtag academic Twitter, hashtag academic chatter. So it got people's eyes who weren't already connected with me. And people really shared some great experiences they've had on Twitter with it, causing them to find new collaborators, or to have solidarity or support as they go through a tough transition in academia, all sorts of things. So I encourage you, when you get the slides, to click on that link to my tweet and read all of the comments for some just additional ways that you could find Twitter to benefit your career or your training. All right, and I think we're right at time. And so I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. I'm going to pop out of the slideshow so that I can see your faces. If you want to turn your camera, you don't have to. I am going to look and see what the Q&A says. Please enter questions into the chat if you have them. And I'm going to look and see. Kelly has been pulling questions. Okay, she's got some questions for me already, but please keep them coming. Any questions you have about this or science communication in general? I'm looking at, it says, Mike has asked, can you talk about the benefits, drawbacks to posting an image versus allowing the shortened link to auto-populate the image contained in the link? Yes. I think it depends. And I am not an expert in sort of what the Facebook, Twitter algorithm does behind the scenes. I choose an actual image versus the link, whatever image is sort of auto-populated from the link that you're including, because often that's like an ugly picture, or it's like an out of focus picture, or it's just like somebody included a link to a talk I was giving. And for some reason, the headshot was my headshot was the auto-populated picture to the link, but it wasn't my full headshot. It was just like my nose and eyes. And I was like, oh my, like don't do that. Somebody take that down. So I think to me, it's visually what looks better, the auto-populated image. If it's a nice image, fine. But I have found just more often than not, it's like a blurry, weirdly cropped image. And I would rather just have a GIF or my own image in there to make it look nicer. I don't know that the algorithm distinguishes. I guess I actually don't know if I know the algorithm boosts things that have added images. I don't know if it detects an image that's auto-populated from a link and boosts that in the same way compared to an image or a GIF that you as the user added. That would be a question for Twitter, but I go from what looks better, and usually it's not the auto-populated link. Awesome. Any other questions? And I am happy if folks have questions, like I said, about other science communications tools. I can talk a little bit about writing for the press if folks don't have any other questions about Twitter. I've been told by my boss, weirdly good with I'm weirdly comfortable with awkward silences. So like I can sit here silently for a while. My students don't love that. But I want to give folks time if they have questions about Twitter. How often would you suggest posting? Thank you, Laura. All right, so full disclosure, I am sort of like a hot and cold Twitter user. I will go through spurts where I'm on there and I post multiple times a day, and then I will go weeks without posting. It's usually just when I'm busy and I don't have the time to necessarily engage. I think if you're actively working to build your following and you really want to sort of see growth in the number of followers and the number of engagements in your tweets, then you should be posting a couple of times a day. And I don't mean like creating these just poetic, professorial tweets. You can just retweet stuff or quote retweet stuff or comment on things. But I think you need to be active. Again, the algorithm boosts more active users. So the more you're active and the more you're on there sharing things or commenting on things or tweeting your own things, the more that's going to appear in other people's timelines. When you go quiet for a while, you get sort of demoted in the algorithm and you won't get boosted as much. So if you're really trying to build followers, get out there a couple of times a day and tweet. And I would say more than tweeting your own thoughts or your own tweets, engaging with others, I think is the better use of your time if you're actively trying to build a Twitter following. When I was starting out, and I don't think I said this, so the reason I was on Twitter pre-academia because I liked to tweet at the food trucks and find out where they were going and where I could eat food. And I was at a conference standing by a poster, and one of my dear mentors, Chris Carpenter, he was on Twitter, he loves Twitter, and he was like, I'm going to tweet your poster. What's your Twitter handle? And I was like, oh no, I can't have somebody see my Twitter account and see all I do is ask like where I can get tacos and French fries. So I quickly, standing at my poster, created a Twitter account, a different one, and was like, here's my Twitter handle. And he tweeted out my poster, and I was like, well, okay, now I have an academic Twitter account. What do I do? So from that moment, when I really was like, all right, I'm on Twitter as an academic now. I think I was a first or second year PhD student at the time. I was like, let's go. And I really tried to be on there, not tweeting about my own stuff, because one, I didn't have that much stuff at the time, but because I really wanted to have people see me as, I wanted people to know that I was in training and that I was learning, that I was interested in connecting with other people, that I was, I wasn't beyond kind of that mode of like, hey, let's meet. Hey, let's support each other. So I was on there a lot, just commenting on people's tweets and chiming in and talking about my expertise, or, hey, we found something similar, or, hey, we're doing this project and it might be relevant, and I can keep you updated as the results come out. So I have found, if you're really trying to build engagement, it's better bang for your buck if you're on there commenting on people's tweets than just tweeting your own stuff, especially if you don't have a large following. Your tweets might not reach a lot of people, but if you comment on somebody's tweet and that person has a lot of followers, that's going to be seen by all of their followers. So it's just, again, a way to get your tweets in front of as many eyes as possible. So using that kind of tactic, I think, is helpful too. Let's see. Can you create a thread by adding on posts at different times? Oh yeah, so you can do both. You can write it all at once. I think that's what most people do, but a lot of people will go back to a thread and add on later. Usually if like their first thread was severely misinterpreted, they will go back and be like, all right, before anybody else says anything, like, this is what I meant, or like, no, I don't need your advice. But you can add on to threads as long as you want. You can go back to, I could go back to a thread I wrote a year ago and add a new tweet to it. The only thing you can't do is sort of like write 3 tweets to your thread, write a 4th one, and schedule the 4th one to come out later. You can go back and add it, but you can't sort of write it all at once and have part of it go live and part of it be scheduled to go later. If that makes sense. And that gets into the scheduling of tweets, which, like I said, is a great tool, but can get a little, it's not as seamless as it probably could be. How do you take something down from Twitter? That is a great question. I mean, you can just delete it. Like that's a thing. It's fine to delete tweets. Like technologically, you can delete it. If it's, we've probably all seen this, people take screenshots of really provocative tweets from people, not me, like I don't tweet anything that anybody would ever worry about, but people take screenshots. So then it's like, well, it doesn't really go away. A lot of times if people tweet something that is maybe offensive or is something that they maybe they wish they hadn't said, if they really want to own it, they will often quote retweet that with their own sort of like apology added, or, look, I had my facts wrong, but I don't want to delete it because then it looks like I'm, not taking responsibility. So some people will never go with the sort of, I never delete things. I just explain what I did and leave it up there with that qualifier. Some people delete things. I mean, I've deleted tweets when there's, a terrible typo and not too many people have liked it yet. I'm like, oh, I can't live with that typo. I'm deleting that tweet and restarting. But you can just delete things, and that's like, people do that, and that's fine. You technically can delete it. Good questions though. Does anyone have any other questions? I can ask folks we have 20 minutes left, and I know it's getting late in the afternoon. Do folks want to hear, I think I have like 4 slides on kind of writing for the media. If anybody has interest in that, I can pull those back up.
That'd be great, Beth. Please do that.
Sure. I see some thumbs up. All right. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. This is why I keep them, because I know sometimes there's an interest and then sometimes we don't have time. But if we have time, I'm happy to talk about this. All right. So the media, this is actually, I prefer this over Twitter. I don't know why. It's probably more stressful and high stakes, but I love working with the media. So I think this is a thing people get really stressed out about and they don't think they can do. It seems very daunting. It seems very like beyond their expertise, but you can write for the media. You can do something right now. You can write something. I guarantee you have an idea or something that's like stuck in your craw that you want to write about, and you can do that. You can write a letter to the editor. You can write an op-ed. You can write a blog post. You can almost always find a home for these. Usually writing something like a letter to the editor, an op-ed, a commentary, a blog post, it's usually written in a way that you're trying to persuade somebody to believe what you say, you know, to take your side. It doesn't have to be controversial. Like, for example, I don't think that many people would argue that we need more, you know, funding for rural health services. So it doesn't have to be controversial, but you can still be advocating and taking a position, especially a letter to the editor or an op-ed. Those tend to be, you know, focused and pointed towards one side or another, and a little sort of like journalism. This will like save you at trivia sometime. A lot of people think an op-ed stands for opinion editorial. It does not. It stands for opposite the editorial page, because when you're laying out a paper, the commentaries would go opposite the editorial page. It'd go on the opposite side of the sort of spread. So an op-ed is opposite editorial, but opinion editorial is kind of what we think of, because it is your opinion. You're trying to persuade people. You should try and tie your topic to a current event. And I have an example of that on the next slide, because all news is timely. Very rarely will they want something that is of no timely public interest. So you kind of have to have your you know, finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world or in the country or in the news, so that you can see that connection to what you want to write about, and you don't want to miss that opportunity. And again, I have some examples of that. Or you could find a niche outlet, and that's always a possibility, where they're always interested in the topic you're talking about. So I've written a couple of blog posts for Academy Health that were about health services research or policy, and I didn't need it to be timely, because Academy Health's blog is always interested in those topics, and so they were interested no matter what time of the year or what was going on in the world. Where do you submit? It doesn't hurt to shoot your shot and go for the New York Times or the Washington Post. Doesn't hurt. They get back to you fairly quickly and tell you no, or they tell you, if you haven't heard from us in a week, move on. So, you never know, but you have better chances of starting small and local. And I think you actually get so much more reward if you're going to the local newspapers, because that's the community. That's the people who can make the change. It's just like with policy, all policy, happens locally. It really is a great way to reach the people who can make the changes or who you really want to influence. So I love writing op-eds or letters to the editor for the small regional newspapers. I always get a lot of great feedback. People seem to find it out of nowhere. And I'm like, well, weird. People are commenting or emailing me and I don't know how they found it. So I like doing the small and local, and it's easier to, obviously, than getting into the New York Times. Before you submit somewhere, read what that outlet or publication has already published. And a lot of places will tell you to do this. If you go to a newspaper's website, they'll usually have a page about kind of what you need to do to submit a letter to the editor or an op-ed, and they'll tell you, please read what we've already published, so that, number one, you're not submitting something that we just wrote about, and then you can kind of get a sense of the tone, the length, what level of detail they want, how much do they want you to bring in, statistics and references, how much of it do they want you to be anecdotal and personal. So read what they've published before you start crafting yours. Pay attention to how the outlet prefers to receive your writing. And what I mean is, sometimes they want you to pitch them an idea before you write it, kind of give them a couple sentences. Here's what I would write. Here's why I'm the expert in writing it. And then they will invite you to write it, and then maybe they'll publish it. Some places want you to go ahead and write it and give them the full finished thing for them to decide. Some of them want it attached in an email. Some of them don't want it attached. They want it in so there's a lot of, it's just like publishing in a journal. There's a lot of requirements that they have, and you just want to read those before you go in and submit. Get feedback from others before you submit anything, preferably not your academic colleagues. Have your friends, have anybody else who's not an academic read it. because that's the audience you're going for, unless it is a sort of niche publication like Academy Health. If you're going for, the Southern Illinoisan, where I'm from, I'm not going to have my colleagues read that and tell me what they think. I'm going to have, one of my friends read it and tell me what they think. And try again. You get rejected. It's just like academic publishing. You get rejected all the time. Don't take it personally. Just try and find another home for the piece. Rework it if they give you feedback, and just keep pushing and keep trying to get it out there. It's not going to happen on the first try, and you're just going to have to keep trying, but it is worth it, and it eventually gets easier. The better you get at it, the less rejections you get, I should say. So when I was saying earlier, is tying it to a timely event. This is a journalism trick. Like when you're getting taught how to write the lead, the opening to an article, boy, if you can tie it to something sort of timely, and I'm sure you've read plenty of newspaper articles where they kind of start with some cheesy like joke like this one does. And like, I'm guilty as a reporter of doing that, because it is a nice segue into whatever the topic would be. So this, and you can learn how to do this. And then when you're pitching an idea or you're writing something, you can do this, and the editor will be like, yes, perfect. Chef's kiss. This is exactly what I want. So here's an example. I think this is from the Washington Post. It's an opinion, the headline: a giant volcano could end human life on Earth as we know it. Why aren't we taking this more seriously? And the lead, the very beginning of the article says, if you're planning to visit Yellowstone National Park this Labor Day weekend, I have good news. It's very, very unlikely the super volcano. So they tie it to Labor Day weekend, which was in a couple of weeks, I think, or a week from when this was published. So the article has nothing to do with Labor Day weekend. Obviously, I think it had to do with like, environmental justice or something. It had to do with the volcano underneath Yellowstone National Park, but they tied it to Labor Day, and it made it just really nice and packaged and timely. And I'm sure the editor was very happy to have that nice little tie-in to something timely. So anytime you can do that, even if it feels cheesy, it's worth doing, because people, editors and reporters love it. Here's another one. So this is obviously from February 2021, so almost a year ago. I need to update these then. But this is: the COVID pandemic has given us a roadmap to transform education for the better. So this opinion article in USA Today, it was all about needing to overhaul the education system, something that I am sure Sal Khan and Brian Hooks believed pre-pandemic needed to be done, but they are using the pandemic as a timely connection and an in for how they can talk about it now. So they're sort of saying, look, the pandemic has thrown the education system upside down. Let's use this opportunity to revamp. It's just tying it into some timely situation, or finding that in that makes it relevant, that makes it timely, that makes it of interest to the readers. So again, thinking how you can do that with your topic, your area of interest, whatever population you're really focused on, that's going to get more people interested in reading it, and more people, more editors kind of interested in publishing it. And I think, yeah, so that's the highlight of the media stuff. I actually, when I'm doing this in person, have a fun exercise where I hand out headlines from the last week's news, and I ask people to take that headline and tie it to their research, kind of thinking through how you can make connections between your research and whatever's going on. And it's not as hard as you think. So if you're wanting to write for the press, start paying attention to headlines and thinking, how could I talk about aging, dementia rural services as it connects to this headline? And if you start making those connections, it'll be easier to write and think about when you're able to get your foot in the door in the media. Any questions about writing for the media? Has anybody had it go well or backfire for them?
Yeah, you raise a lot of good points, Beth. I've done some op-eds and other kinds of things like that in the past. And yeah, like you said, I shot high. I mean, I went, I think, to the Washington, New York Times, and never heard anything. So it turned into the Star Tribune, and it actually went well and was received well. And you're right. It's thinking about the writing style and what it should look like, while still being true to our scientific principles, which can be challenging. I mean, I've seen many academics who are quoted, and maybe some who gravitate to being quoted in the press. They they advocate, but in a way they leave the research they've done behind in some cases. I'm trying to be diplomatic here. In a way where, I kind of question sometimes, why are they, why are they presenting themselves to the media and what they're doing in this way?
Yeah.
Better in terms of the scholarly, the scholarship that's being done. You see what I'm saying? I'm trying to be very general here, but that's been some of my impressions.
No, absolutely. I've seen that. And I think I'm always hyper aware. I wrote one thing about rural how we can help rural areas kind of follow the pandemic prevention tasks or guidelines this is pre-vaccine. So I was sort of saying, like, here's what the literature shows we could do to help them, wash their hands, blah, blah, blah. And I suddenly became this like rural vaccine expert. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, I'm not an infectious disease doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist. And I really was trying to sort of like slow that train, because I think it's I think a combination of the media not fully understanding what people do and seeing sort of keywords and thinking, boy, that person must be an expert. And then when if you're not aware that the media think you know more than you do, you're suddenly caught off guard and you're sort of on stage or on air answering questions that you don't feel like you should answer. And to that point, I think it's always helpful. There's no shame in, just like we were taught to do in academic presentations, if you don't know an answer, don't fake it, don't make it up, just say, that's not my area of expertise. I'm not able to speak on that. The media will be fine with that. You don't have to feel bullied or pressured to answer things that you don't feel comfortable. But there's also, I think, as a researcher, and I'm trying to think of how to be doing, I've talked to people and they're so grateful for my expertise. And it's so different than academia, where we tend to not offer a lot of praise. We tend to not tell people that they're really smart. And so there's just this lure of like being told you're an expert and being invited to give talks on the radio or on TV. And I think we have to, be on guard for that and not let this fame. Not that I have that at all, but I think some of the people I've seen who I also think are maybe a little out over their skis. It's like, I wonder if they just got so excited with all the invitations and with all the popularity that they like, oh, somebody wants to hear about my work. I would love to go and talk about my work, when maybe it's not the best. I've turned down actually a fair number of media requests because either I know I am not qualified to speak on the topic, and I've said, I shouldn't be talking about this. Here are some people who should, or the outlet itself, I know doesn't probably have they're unlikely to represent the full picture of the topic. And I don't want to inadvertently contribute to the misinformation, because you don't know how they're going to cut it out and cut little chunks out. And that's why, and I don't think I said this, when I talk to people about how to prepare for media interviews, I really stress getting 2 or 3 main like quotes that you would be confident and you would want quoted by you in that story, whether it's on air or it's in press, and just repeat those and get them in your mind to where you can say them on autopilot, because that's what journalists are usually looking for, is that one quote or that one fact that they can really lead with or they can end with. So if you don't give that to them, they'll come up with it themselves, and it might be wrong and it might not be what you wanted them to emphasize. So direct the conversation, have those quotes in your mind. If you get stuck on a question that you don't know the answer to, be like, oh, I'm not able to speak on that, that's outside my expertise, but here, blah, 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 and say your quotes. If you just keep kind of coming back to those key messages, it's going to drive the journalist to where they need to go. And then you're not going to get stuck in a situation where you're talking well beyond your area of expertise. And if you find yourself doing that, again, it's okay to just step back and say, I'm not qualified to speak on that. Would love to know the answer, though. Kind of just put it back on the journalist. They should be doing their homework, though, and they should know who you are and what you can and can't speak to. If you've ever done a media interview, almost always you do sort of a pre-interview with the producer, usually before you kind of talk to the person on air, and you'll go through the whole interview and they'll ask you questions know if you know what you're talking about, and two, to know what you can and can't answer, and kind of what answers you excelled at and what answers maybe you were a little unclear on. So ideally you'll have done a pre-interview, and so that by the time you go on air with the host, they've just got the set of questions that the producer has given them. And it's actually less nerve-wracking because you know what you're going to get asked. That pre-interview with the producer, I always find a little more nervous because it's more like an interview, and it's like, do they like me? Am I saying the right things? Are they going to invite me for the full interview? So just know that if somebody ever contacts you and says, oh, I just want to have an informational interview, I'm from WSIL or whatever, like that's the thing you want to impress them on. If they then invite you for the on-air interview, they've kind of already screened you. So if you get asked by a producer to talk, that's the important piece.
We're coming to the end of our time here. This has been wonderful, Beth. So much great information. We'll reach out to you, Beth, to get your consent if we can post this recording in the slides on the CHI website, because I think this will continue to be a really great resource for people.
Absolutely. And I will share my slides that folks can have.
Thank you, Beth, so very much. I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Any last minute burning questions, issues, topics while we have Beth here with us that you'd like answered? Okay, well, unlike you, Beth, I'm not as comfortable with awkward silences. What I'm going to do is I think we'll adjourn. Again, thank you so very much for being here for this special CHI seminar. I thought it was great, such great information, and I know I'll be sharing it with colleagues. I hope you do too. We'll be following up with you soon. And those of you that aren't members of CHI, please do consider joining. Email us chi@umn.edu. We do have a Twitter account as well. So thanks again. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, we so appreciate it. Anything I could do to favor, let me know. So.
Oh no, you've already helped. You spoke to ISAR, so I appreciate it. And this was great. I love talking this to anybody. I will put my email in the chat. If folks have questions, you want to talk more about this, please reach out, or find me on Twitter. I really enjoyed the talk. Thanks again for the invitation. Thanks to everybody for joining and being so engaged in the chat and in the Q&A.
Thank you, Beth. Take care. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.